Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV.
Welcome back to HFO-TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate on this great sunny day. Today we're lucky enough to have Larry Holt, Vice President of Greater Portland Inc., to come talk to us a little bit about what they do and how that kind of relates to some of the housing and things that we're seeing in this market. So thank you, Larry, for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Maybe you can give people a little background. I mean, I've know what Greater Portland Inc. is, but maybe give a little in depth for our audience of what exactly is kind of the mission and where they play in this kind of growth of the Portland area.
Great. Well, we are the regional economic development entity for the Greater Portland region. And when we talk about the region, we mean really from Hillsborough to Vancouver to Tualatin and the city of Portland as well. So we serve the entire metro.
Got it.
And our charge is to go out and promote Portland as a place to do business around the country and internationally. So we're trying to attract new business in that'll create new jobs and drive continued investment in Greater Portland. And so I moved here in 2016 to do that, and my entire role is business development. Finding that next great project for the Greater Portland region.
You're kind of the sharp end of the spear to kind of introduce people that don't know about Portland as an opportunity to come and move your business or start your business.
If you're a big corporate decision maker in Dallas, you're not thinking about Portland.
Right.
So the approach we've taken is to be kind of high touch, and get out there and get in front of those decision makers, get in front of those key consultants, say at Deloitte, for example, who are advising a lot of corporations, and let them know about all the great momentum in our market.
What's been in kind of working with these companies? I mean, is there a particular segment that at this present time that you're focusing on, or is it being part of Greater Portland? Is it just kind of a catch-all?
We're not trying to boil the ocean.
Got it. Okay, got it.
We have some very specific target sectors that play into our existing strengths, and those won't be real surprising to anybody that's spent any time here. For instance, computer hardware, computer software, and what I would call consumer, which covers athletic and outdoor apparel, obviously Nike, Columbia Sportswear, Adidas, Nautilus in Vancouver, Washington.
Right.
Those are, the secret sauce behind all those companies is great product managers and great consumer brand managers. So those skill sets are transferable to a range of consumer companies. And even to be a little bit more forward thinking, what we're really seeing an uptick in, when you think Portland, you think environmental, you think green, you think clean technology. And where we're really starting to see interest is in what we're calling smart mobility, the next generation vehicle, and that's built on the electric vehicle, frankly. All the autonomous technologies and are really built on the platform of EV, and we have a great story to tell there. And I think the company that's thinking about beyond, the current automobile, they don't, the skill sets they need are not in Michigan. They're in Silicon Valley and Portland. So, we also pursue opportunities in manufacturing. This is a port town, quite literally, so there's a great blue-collar workforce here. And given OHSU also opened to great opportunities in health science.
Okay. So kind of wide, diverse, kind of like our economy is.
Exactly. Very much mirrors our economy, but we're not going after everything. There's hundreds of thousands of companies in this world. We're not going to be a financial services hotspot the way San Francisco or Dallas or Charlotte are.
Right.
So that's not really a target for us. But within our sort of key growth areas where the economy is growing and where we have a great story to tell, we're going to be aggressive.
And are the municipalities of the Greater Portland area, are they kind of giving a direction, or is it go out and just see what you can bring in, and we'll kind of get it through the colander? And
our communities are our greatest supporters.
Okay.
They are our asset. Because I'm not taking them to Greater Portland. When a company comes here, I'm taking them to I'm taking them to the Pearl or out to Hillsborough or across the river to the great waterfront development in Vancouver. So they are our greatest supporters, and frankly, they because they're fairly sophisticated, all of them have slightly different targets, but they're for the most part aligned with us.
Okay. So in looking as you go out and kind of pitch the story, what, we kind of know inherently when we live here, kind of what's the perception outside of the benefits of coming to, the Pacific Northwest, Portland from a company standpoint?
People.
Still people.
People is really, it's, the really great jobs, the companies hiring those high-paying jobs, that's their biggest cost, and so, we're not out advertising free land or anything like that. What we can show is some of the highest inbound migration of educated young adults in the country.
Is here.
Here.
Right.
It's amazing when we go out because, I'm kind of a sales guy, and when the companies are touring here, they don't want to hear from me. They want to hear from other companies.
Right. What's their experience?
What is the actual customer experience like? And really one of the fascinating anecdotes to me is hearing hiring managers say whenever they post a position, they get resumes from around the U.S.
Right.
So there's not just current high population growth.
But you've got demand still, that same population still wanting to come here.
Absolutely. That's a great story for us to tell.
Yeah.
And, and then to expand on why, so why do all these people want to move here?
Right.
Well, you and I live here and we know what a great place it is, but I think it kind of starts front and center with our great transportation infrastructure. I moved here from Austin, and Austin's a great city.
Compared to Portland a lot.
They're very similar.
Yeah.
But you live in your car in Texas.
Right.
In a way that we don't here. And really, just the way I end up trying to portray this to interested C-suite decision makers is we present a great value. We're not the cheapest, but in terms of amenities and how far above our weight we punch, great food options. You can surf and snow ski in the same day here in the Pacific Northwest. We think for the price it presents a really compelling value, and we're seeing that resonates.
Okay. So in our industry, in the housing side, we always talk about, we talked up at the immigration of higher educated people coming here and still here. We used to joke around, you'd have immigration of people, high education, coming here without a job, just want to get in the area, figuring they're going to find it when they get here, which was great. We've had a lot of growth there. I think that's still happening. Are there concerns from your standpoint, is it, the lack of affordable housing? Is it, the tax? Is there stuff that's on the horizon as a group that's out selling Portland that makes you kind of say, okay, how do we address this stuff?
That's a great question, and I'm going to answer it probably in a different way than you would expect. But I think, one of our key areas that we go after is international.
Okay.
Because, you might ask why. The international companies tend to, they tend to use small businesses in the ecosystem more, so there's that dollar really multiplies.
Right.
And they tend to pay higher wages, frankly. And so I think, given our current economic trade environment and how strong our consumer sector is, that's something that worries me.
Okay.
Especially when seems like you can't go a week without reading about some new tariff.
Right. And we're a port, like you said, we're a port city.
Trade is what we
huge.
do.
Yeah.
It's in our DNA, and so when we have these kind of trade wars popping up internationally, that's tough. And corporate America and the corporate world is, they're looking to shed risk, not take on new risk. So that can make my job more difficult. In terms of housing, what I see, one of our great projects last year was Genentech, which has announced they're doing 300 new jobs in the Lloyd Center. And so what was interesting to me about that was, in addition to meeting universities, very common to understand what the people coming out of the education system, what their skills are. In addition to meeting other local companies to understand what the hiring environment is like, they wanted to tour housing.
Interesting. Okay.
They wanted to tour neighborhoods. They wanted to see apartments. So
Within the location of Lloyd Center, or just kind of city general?
within the metro,
Got it,
really,
okay. Okay.
because I think there is a bit of a concern.
Yeah.
I think there is a bit of concern about the supply, and that's not to say they're going. We obviously don't have any housing. We're able to go through and pull data and show, yeah, there's a range of options here, and but they want to see it.
Right. Got it. Yeah, they want to see is it really yes.
Right. Make sure we're not putting them 40 miles outside of the city.
Right. For the commute. Yeah.
To find a $1,500 a month reasonably priced two-bedroom apartment.
Which which is still on the West Coast. We are can still consider the major least cost. Commute times are less here when you compare to Seattle, San Francisco, LA. Right. You start losing that economic advantage. That's
right, and part of the reason this is such a livable, walkable place is because we've chosen to be compact,
right,
and not sprawl out to the ocean, and that's great, But does that introduce some constraints to housing? Some, and what I hear about is, is there housing for that? Is there entry level housing for that new manager?
Right.
That's maybe 80,000 a year, starting a family. Where's that entry level housing in a good school district, and what does that look like? And so, in my job, we overcome obstacles, and housing is one of the things we overcome.
And what about? Is there a feeling on the I don't know, in Portland's kind of the business climate? Is there a concern that is this a business? We heard all about Amazon's headquarters in New York saying no, we don't want to do that. I mean, is there a perception that this is not business friendly, so to speak? I mean, I get compared to Texas, I understand, but where do we kind of rank, or is that something that's more, the location outweighs that potential?
I choose to take the offense on that.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is why don't we talk about the business climate issues in the Southeast?
Right. Okay.
Where you see some really regressive bills taking place, against LGBTQ rights, against rights to choose. There are progressive values here that we should be proud of and really position front and center, and those align, I think, with the kind of forward-thinking company that's considering the West Coast.
So that'll outweigh any, like you said, maybe there's a business tax or things of that nature. It's really because as you said, the biggest key on these companies is their employees. I mean, where are they going to live? Are they going to be comfortable here?
I think young talent wants to be in a tolerant, progressive place.
Exactly.
And I don't see any reason to shy away from that.
Okay, I agree with that. And then what is there a concern at all about? We talked about we have an urban growth boundary here.
We do.
I'm a big manufacturing company. Is there, the option of are there available sites, or is there available space, and how do you where do you guys playing that? Is it more, hey, let's look at that and then we'll deal with this as we get closer?
One of the great things about my organization that I'm really proud of is, and because I'm personally overseeing what we're calling our employment site readiness study, where we're not just selling and marketing what we have. We want to make sure there's a continued supply. So we're involved in a study right now with the Port of Portland and our friends at Metro on really analyzing those obstacles to bringing new employment lands online and working with our great community partners on that. So, that's always a concern. We've got to be proactive.
Yeah.
This is a very competitive business.
Oh, yeah.
There's essentially 1,000 expansions in corporate America a year.
1,000?
Okay? Yeah, 1,000 new locations.
Okay.
So, and there's 50 states competing over those. So, we've got to be pretty forward thinking about, making sure not just we can sell today, but we can sell tomorrow.
And we already talked about, so the most for a company looking to expand is so it's really the quality of life for their employees.
Right.
Do they have a pipeline of employees coming in, or not that they're saying they're going to hire all local, but if they're not, do people still want to come here, and kind of keeping that livability factor up?
It's one of our key assets, and I just don't shy away from it. And we tend to compete against Denver, Austin, Phoenix, Salt Lake City. Those tend to be our competitor markets. So real typical, you asked about sectors that
Right.
we're interested in. Well, the other part of that is, probably our ideal company is, in the Midwest or the East Coast, and growing rapidly, but doesn't have any locations on the West Coast. So maybe that's the sandbox they're choosing to look at. And when I look at some of those markets that don't, have really underbuilt transportation, or maybe they're fairly sizable, but the education levels aren't as high.
Right.
I think we've got a competitive product.
Well, like I said, we've had companies moving here. We've had, continued immigration. Like I said, we both live here and know kind of the benefits of being here. And there's, as we've talked about affordability on housing, I think that's especially on the coast. That's just, that's not a Portland-specific issue. I think it's up and down the coast and how we deal with that, and the
Absolutely.
kind of the combat of people already here, new people are going to come. How do we blend that in and not get into an urban sprawl issue?
Right. Those are big, giant issues, but I think this region has done, that comes back to the transportation issue. Right. And, this region, we've really put billions of dollars into a working public transportation system where you can, you can bike, bus, or take, take the light rail today. And that's really, when you talk about an overall household cost,
that's huge.
Do you factor in, how you can substantially reduce your automobile investments here?
Right.
So that's kind of helped us with that competitiveness.
Well, good. Well, that's great. So for somebody who wants to learn more about your organization, they can go to the website.
GreaterPortlandInc.com.
Okay.
Come check out our work. We highlight some of our recent corporate announcements.
Okay.
Lots of great information on Portland and the metro, and our, all sorts of economic data you can dig into.
You've got research you're doing that you're presenting.
I would also highlight, our annual economic summit is coming up, which is our big September celebration at the Portland Art Museum of all the great things happening in our metro, and we're excited about that. And you can sign up and buy tickets online.
Okay, well, look at that. Well, thank you for coming. It was very good, and we'll see you next time on HFO TV.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.